A warm welcome to Disky Talk with Liolo. If you're tuning in for the very first time, I do ask that you please subscribe and hit that notification bell. If you've been a part of this journey, I hope you thoroughly enjoy this episode. So, on today's episode, I discuss all things Kaizer Chiefs as I have a tactical feature focus where we look at Coach Arthur Zwane's men. So when you do have a look at this Kaizer Chiefs side within the league this season, they've played 21 games, they've won 9, they've drawn 4, and they've lost 8. They currently sit on 31 points, they've scored 23 goals, and they've conceded 24. And their goal difference is currently -1. So from a numbers perspective, that's what it looks like for Kaizer Chiefs. So let's rewind then and have a look at the beginning of the season. So in the beginning of the season, Coach Arthur Zwane stressed the importance of the team being able then to link defense into midfield and then also the forward line as well with regards to their passing game, and spoke heavily on being able then to build up from the back and being able then to connect passes. However, when we do have a look then with regards to how they fared out in that department, they really struggled within the beginning of the season, because then they were just not able then to institute seamless and smooth build-up play with regards to their schemes and their patterns in build-up. So when you have a look at it then, they've also then been quite inconsistent in that regard within the defensive area, especially then within the beginning of the season, where then they were chopping and changing the goalkeepers. But we do see now that Peterson has been the number one in the recent games, and at centre-back they also had a very big problem. You know, I still do think that they still do have big problems, but at the beginning of the season, their problem then was that they were not able then to build up, and also that they didn't have a player on the left-hand side who could facilitate a smooth build-up, and it was largely down to them not having a left-sided centre-back who is left-footed. Whereas I tend to disagree with that, because you don't need a left-footed centre-back to play as the left-sided centre-back for him to be successful with regards to the build-up schemes and the build-up patterns. All you need then is, if he is right-footed, what becomes important in that regard is his first touch, firstly, his body orientation and his awareness. So even if you have a right-footed player playing as the left-sided centre-back, even under pressure, if he has a good first touch, his positioning and his awareness is very good, he's still able then to become a press-resistant centre-back who's very key with regards to build-up play. But they really struggled in that regard, because we did see Quiniga playing in this position, which I think he struggled from this perspective with regards to building up because of those things I just mentioned. Sometimes his awareness and positioning wasn't adequate. Sometimes the first touch wasn't always adequate, and he'd always then look to have a regressive first touch, where he'd have the ball and he'd be looking to bring it onto his strong foot, which is his right foot, and that would immediately close passing lanes and close the angles for him. Whereas if he had a progressive first touch on his back foot, which is his left foot, then he would be able to open up and be able then to advance the ball down the left-hand side, or even then see the rest of the pitch a lot better. But then a lot of the times he'd be square on and he'd be forced to play the pass backwards. So that is an area that they really struggled in. We did see them then changing centre-back partners, because at some point you had Ngezana, at some point you had Njabulo Ngoma, and they just kept making mistakes. Even then within the goalkeeping department, from build-up perspective, they were also making mistakes. But fast forward, we did see Dov coming in. So Dov came in as a left-sided centre-back. Then Quiniga went to the right side. That's been predominantly their centre-back pairing. Then you have Peterson there. But when you do have a look at it, as much as Dov has had very good performances, but at the end of the day, he's not a specialist centre-back, because he is a left-back. Naturally, he is a left-back. And this has shown in certain instances. Sometimes the space then between him and his centre-back partner would often be a bit too wide. Sometimes he'd drift to this left wide pocket of space, because predominantly then he is a left back. So when you do have a look at Dov, he has been a player who has had very good defensive performances, but then sometimes then he has struggled with regards to positioning and overall even making mistakes, then communication and awareness as well. And I think that largely then boils down to the fact that he's not a centre back naturally, and that it is more a makeshift, and because he is left-footed, so then he does tick that box with regards to build-up play, because that improved in that regard because he is comfortable on the ball. But when you do have a look at Kaizer Chiefs, they have conceded more than they've scored. So their defensive problems stem from the fact that at the back, within the centre-back department, that they don't have specialists. Also, when you look at Quinica, he's played his career predominantly in the right-back area as opposed to centre-back. So I do think that there are times where he does get exposed, and also when you look at his body orientation, and also when it comes to then having to sort out his feet when a cross is played or a ball is played. So they still do struggle then with crosses, and also then when it comes to dealing with wide overloads. From a defensive perspective, that's what Kaizer Chiefs have really struggled with, dealing with crosses and wide overloads as well. Within the left-back department, we have seen Shanti play as a left-back. At right-back, we've seen so many changes because Frosler has played there, Solomons has played there, Ngezane has played there. But we also did see that Ngezane and Quinica swapped, and when they did swap, it did look a bit better with regards to Quinica being a lot more comfortable in that right-back position. But overall, when you look at it from a defensive perspective, Kaizer Chiefs have really struggled. That is why they've scored less goals than they have conceded. So they've conceded more than they've scored, and their defensive problems continue. So even if they don't concede in the match, but the space that they would leave in between themselves, their defensive line, is often a very wide space that opposition could look to exploit, and the space in behind as well, you know. So defensively, that is what they've looked like, and they've really struggled. So if you don't then have centre backs, because centre backs become key then to the defensive performance, and centre backs are a pillar of any side, you know, because when you build a side, you need a foundation. So the solid foundation starts from the back, building it from the centre backs, working it in the midfield, and then looking to go up front. When you go then within the heart of midfield, so when they did start, they didn't play with a recognized defensive midfielder, but then fast forward, we did see Jabulo Blom coming into that position, and he played very well. He made it his own. And when you then have a look at some of the things that Kaizer Chiefs do struggle with regards to the wide overloads, Blom was well and able to protect Shanti. If there was a wide overload on this side, if there was a wide overload on the right, he'd be able to break down play. He read the game very well. Also then, when you look at how key he was then with assisting and facilitating the build-up play for Kaizer Chiefs, he'd look to collect and come in between the centre-backs. And he was a shield then for his defence, and had very good performances then within the heart of midfield. But we do know that Blom then did depart, and he did leave, and he earned himself a very great move then to America. But then, ever since Blom has left, then we have seen them going back then to a double pivot of Mart and Sitebe. So when you then have a look at this double pivot, within this double pivot, you also don't have a specialist of a defensive midfielder, which then further extends Kaizer Chiefs' problems, especially then when you look at it from a defensive perspective. Because what becomes key then from a defensive perspective is having a very solid block. And when you have a solid block of specialists, it becomes very difficult for opposition to break you down. But if your block then doesn't have specialists and the players aren't performing consistently, then you are prone to conceding goals. Hence why Kaizer Chiefs have conceded so many goals. So even then, in this department, they've struggled from a defensive perspective with regards to being able then to create that solid block. And then when you then have a look at their creative midfielder, we did see Nkosimpile Ngobo come in there. At some point, we do know that he wasn't playing. Now he is injured, so we have seen Mdu come in. Mdu has had a couple of good performances, but when you do have a look at Kaizer Chiefs from an overall perspective within the heart of midfield, they lack a lot of creativity and a lot of penetration. And even when they do have the ball, they do sometimes struggle to break down opposition. They do struggle to break down a low block then. And then when you have a look at it up front, it's also been so many different options that we have seen up front. But as of late, we have seen Saile there, we have seen Dupriya, and then you have seen Dolly coming off the left. So when you do have a look at Kaizer Chiefs, overall the word that does stand out is inconsistency. And also then when you have a look at them then, and you have a look at how they've been trying to go about things, I don't think that they have a clear game model. I don't think that they even have a philosophy, to be honest, because a lot of people do tend to make the mistake of thinking that ball possession equals philosophy, whereas it doesn't. A philosophy would be a clear set idea in each and every single phase of the game. So that's what then a philosophy would comprise of. You know, it encompasses of ideals, schemes, and patterns with each and every single phase of the game. But when you have a look at each and every single phase of the game when it comes to Kaizer Chiefs, they've been very inconsistent. Some phases, they do not even tick the box. So first of all, we'll have a look at it then in possession. So in possession of the ball, like I mentioned, in the beginning of the season, they looked then to dominate possession and be in control of the ball. But now we do see that when they are pressed, they do tend to go long very quickly. So that means then sometimes they are prone to abandoning then that build-up approach where they're looking to build up. Because if you're a team then that is consistent in looking to build up from deep, you then have multiple build-up schemes, even against a team that looks to press you aggressively. But with Chiefs, we've seen that as of late, the build-up hasn't been as seamless and as smooth. And when they are pressed, they do quickly go long. You know, so in possession of the ball, in build-up, very inconsistent. When you then have a look at them in possession of the ball, so let's just move them further forward and further up. So sometimes what you will see then is that they would sort of have that in possession. Sitebe would drop in and sort of make it a three-man build-up. So you'd have somewhat of that, where you'd have the two fullbacks would offer the width, and then you'd have the wingers looking to tuck in, and then you'd have a striker there, you'd have Mart there, and then you'd have Du Shabalala there. So that is what they would look like in possession. But the problem now is that possession alone means nothing if you can't penetrate into the final third and create clear-cut chances. And that is an area that they struggle in, because sometimes they will be able to keep the ball, but when it comes to penetrating a low block or being able then to create chances or score against a low block, they really struggle in that regard. So when you do have a look at Kaizer Chiefs in possession, I would say that they've been quite inconsistent, and there isn't any clear patterns of play and passing patterns and movement patterns when they are in possession. There aren't things that they do repeatedly which are identifiable in each and every single game. So in that regard, that's why I would say that they're very inconsistent. And I would also then say that there isn't really a philosophy per se and patterns that they have established. A lot of their good work and a lot of their goals do tend to come from individual brilliance, do tend to come from opposition mistakes as well. So when you are then a team that is looking to build and looking then to become a very formidable side, it becomes very important then that in possession, you've got your movement patterns, you've got your passing patterns, you've got your schemes as well, which are clearly identifiable. If you've got your wide overloads, how do we look to penetrate from the wide areas? How do we look to overload the wide area? Being able then to break down opposition, penetrate, do we cut it back, do we cross it? There are multiple schemes and patterns that you should have. With this Kaizer Chiefs side, it isn't always as identifiable. And then when you move on then, right along, and you have a look at them out of possession. So out of possession, which has been quite surprising, has been their press for me. Because sometimes they decide to press and sometimes they wouldn't, which isn't a problem. The problem comes then when the press is disjointed, where you have one player looking to press, but the others don't follow him. And we've seen that a lot of times with Kaizer Chiefs with regards to out of possession, where one will look to press, and then it's easy then for the opposition to actually play through them, and where then they are able then to actually progress the ball. So their press has been disjointed, and then sometimes they'll look to sit in the mid-block, which I think they're better suited in sitting in this mid-block, especially considering then the type of players they have. Because when they sit in this mid-block or low block, then they can actually utilize the strengths that they have, which is speed. So in transition, that is an area then they do look to cause a threat. That is an area that they could actually use to exploit. So they are better off at times sitting in a mid-block and looking to be compact. And I would say that there are games where then they've sat in their mid-block where then they were able to nullify opposition, especially against Orlando Pirates back-to-back in both derbies. I think from a tactical perspective and with regards to their mid-block and how then they were able to nullify Orlando Pirates and ensure that those creative players couldn't really get into the game. They did well with regards to how compact they've been. But when you do have a look at it then, out of possession, I would also say that is an area that they are inconsistent in and they struggle in. And I think what Kaizer Chiefs struggle in overall, and if there is a moment in the season that defines their complete and overall struggle, would be the goal they conceded against Sundowns at the FNB Stadium, where Sundowns then were instituting build-up on the right-hand side. Kaizer Chiefs looked to press, but it was very disjointed. Sundowns were able to play through them. They were then able to stretch them. And you had Zwane was playing as the defensive midfielder that day. He was stretched. He came into this wide position. When he comes into this wide position, he isn't able to foul or win the ball against Zwane. The play progresses, a cross is played, cut back into Miami, and then Miami finishes. So when you look at those things, firstly, it is a disjointed press where the opposition can play through them. Secondly, it is then not having a natural defensive midfielder who is able then to break down opposition play, who is able to deal with the wide overload which is instituted. Thirdly, it is a cross which is played that the centre-backs can't deal with, and then they go and score. That is what they are out of possession. And then when you do then move on then right along, we have a look at transitions. So transitions are split into two. So we've got offensive transitions and then we've got defensive transitions. When you look at offensive transitions, that is an area where they can really hurt opposition, and they have hurt opposition because of the speed that they have and how then they can actually look to use that as a weapon. So in that area, I would say they've got all the necessary tools. It's just about them being more organized and more structured with regards to their rest attack. So rest attack then meaning how are their offensive players positioned when they are defending deep, so that they are able then to utilize that space in behind. In that area, they do look quite dangerous. When you do have a look then at their defensive transition, so sometimes they do struggle because then of how open they tend to be and not having a natural defensive midfielder who has the knack of being able to break down those opposition transitions and being able to position himself adequately. Then when you move on then right along, we have a look at set pieces. So when you have a look at set pieces, offensive set pieces, I would say in that area, it does look like they have improved because they've scored a couple of goals from offensive set pieces with Dolly Tuhlanti. They've been able to replicate that, and they've been able to put in very good balls into the box where they've looked a threat. They just need to work on their finishing. But that is an area then that if they do improve, they could also look then to hurt opposition. When you then have a look at their defensive set pieces, like I mentioned, they do struggle with crosses generally. They do struggle with set pieces as well. So in a nutshell, that is Kaizer Chiefs. With regards to their strengths, I would say then it is when they do have space in behind and they are able to exploit that space with the speed that they have. I would say qualitative superiority. So for example, when Dolly is able to use his great technical ability to whip in quality balls and they are able to finish those off. When you have Dupree who's looking then to run in behind. And when you do have a look at Dupree, this is also then a player who I think has been played out of position and used incorrectly by virtue of his strengths. When you look at Dupree, he is the type of player who likes to play on the shoulder of the last defender. So Dupree is very dangerous whenever he's making those runs. He's very good at getting himself into very good goal-scoring positions, also in the box. But the problem then with him then becomes his finishing. So if Dupree can polish up his finishing, he'll be a very deadly player for this Kaizer Chiefs side. So Dupree is very dangerous when he's looking to make those runs and he has that central movement. He's often a threat. And then in between the lines, from a creative perspective, we have seen him do in the past couple of games. He has been able then to offer some quality for that Kaizer Chiefs side. But overall, then you wouldn't be wanting to depend on a youngster and a player who's just been promoted. You know, it does become a collective effort with regards to looking then to create chances, which is an area that they should also improve in. But overall then, that is a feature focus from a tactical perspective with regards to Kaizer Chiefs. And that is my opinion of what I think of Kaizer Chiefs so far. I do think that they do lack structure. They're not organized, and there is no philosophy, nor is there a game model. And wanting to keep possession doesn't automatically equate to you having a philosophy, because what a philosophy would encompass would be clear ideals, clear patterns and clear schemes in each and every single phase of the game. And when you look at all the phases of the game, you've got transitions, which are split into defensive and offensive. You've got set pieces, which are split into defensive and offensive. You've got in possession. You've got out of possession as well. And when you then look at a philosophy and a clear game model, a team then would be able to replicate and have identifiable patterns in each and every single phase. However, when you do have a look at it then, they still do have 9 games to play in the season. Like I said, they sit on 31 points. So if they do manage to pull great performances and they can string along wins, they can look then to try finish in that second spot for the CAF Champions League within the Nedbank Cup. They can also look then to progress. But I don't foresee them then going on to win the Nedbank Cup, nor do I foresee them then being able to finish second. And the reason boils down to them being very inconsistent, especially when it comes to those phases, and them not being able to string along very consistent performances and very consistent results, where then they are able then to pick up back-to-back wins consecutively, and where then they're able not to drop points consecutively. So the story of Kaizer Chiefs this season has been a story of inconsistency and lacking then identifiable patterns with each and every single phase. However, that is my assessment. At home, do let me know, what is your assessment of Kaizer Chiefs and Coach Arthur Zwane, and how far do you think that they'll finish this season? Can they go on then to compete for the Nedbank Cup? Can they go on to finish in that second spot for the CAF Champions League? And what is your overall view of Kaizer Chiefs? Thank you very much for tuning in to yet another special episode of Diski Talk with Liolo. Signing out.